Well, thank you. Thank you very much to the wisdom of Gordon Brown. It's always a delight to listen to him. I'm so honored to be moderating this section of the program, and very happy, very, very happy, because this is not a minor gathering. It is the biggest, by far, side event of the UN General Assembly High-Level Week. And we have gathered many, many times. This is a special occasion. It's the 80th anniversary of the United Nations. As many of you have said already, we are meeting in times of challenge, but also in times of opportunity. And I heard you, Prime Minister Brown. We have to build a world that goes from duty-free to dutiful. And the dutiful is collective action, is us coming together to do good and to build a better world together. I really like the motto of the current President of the General Assembly, better together. I really like that motto. But let's go to business. We are continuing with the high energy of the opening session. This session is very special because we have with us the one and only Charles Michel. He's the President Emeritus of the European Council and former Prime Minister of Belgium. So welcome. We are thrilled to have you, Excellency. And it's a true honor to moderate this dialogue with you. And let's start and go to business. We know that during your leadership, you helped steer the Union through defining crises, from the COVID-19 pandemic to the economic and energy shocks in Europe. Your vision and leadership have been grounded in the values of unity, of collaboration. You have really been an action and a doer in building unity and partnerships, not only within the European Union, but with Africa in general, with the Global South, and advancing Europe's digital and climate transition. So it is, again, I repeat, it is a true privilege to be having this conversation with you. And I have to tell you, he was asked to deliver a keynote speech at the podium, and he told me, I prefer to have a conversation, sit horizontally, and speak to all of you. So my first question to you, Mr. Michel, during your tenure, I recall you listening many times, saying that the European Union is the key partner for multilateralism. And as we mark this 80th anniversary of the United Nations and we embark in profound and deep reforms through the implementation of the Pact of the Future, but also the UN80 initiative. So how do you see Europe's contribution to renewing multilateralism in this moment of what I would call a moment of global strain? So what is how do you see the role of multilateralism in the world of today?
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be this morning with all of you. And this morning I was listening to all the great speeches that were delivered. And I feel that we all agree on something that's very simple. In fact, today, there is no doubt that the world is more and more multipolar. In my opinion, that's good. I prefer a multipolar world. But the paradox is that in those circumstances, multilateralism is probably weaker than ever if we compare since World War II. That's the paradox we face. And I think we have to take into account at least three fundamental factors, three fundamental elements. The first one, in my opinion, that's China. The rise, the ambition of China in the technological field, in the military field, and the wish in China to play well. We are looking at the current situation. The second topic, it was said, we are looking at the current situation. The second topic, it was said, very well said by Gordon Brown a few minutes ago, we can see more and more armed conflicts across the world. These are the facts. If we see the last 10 years, there is a clear increase with more armed conflicts. And it's absolutely clear that the war launched by Russia against Ukraine, that's a new reality, because a permanent member of the Security Council, supposed to be one of the guardians of the UN Charter, is invading a 40 million country inhabitants. That's what we face today. But we should also take into account other very serious conflicts in the Middle East, what is going on in Gaza, in the Palestine, in that region, following this terrorist attack. I will come back on this topic. Sudan, in Africa. Very often we forget to look at what is going on in that part of the world and in other continents with those tragedies and with immense human sufferings. And the third factor we have to take into account, and maybe in Europe that's not something that's easy to observe or to accept, that's America first being a policy, being a new normal. And we have to take into account, even if on my side it's not something that's new, because there were many signals in recent years showing this direction. I don't think that Mr. Donald Trump is an accident. I think that's a symptom of an evolution in this country. I'm certain that all of us, we have listened carefully to the speech that was delivered yesterday by Mr. Donald Trump, and it's very important, in my opinion, not to suffer from what I'm calling a kind of cognitive delay. Sometimes there are things we don't like to see, and we try to refuse, and we say, we don't see what you see, but we have to be lucid. And if we are lucid, we have to make an assessment, and we have to assume that there will be some important consequences. I can share some examples how it will change, I think, the relationship in the future between the United States and the European Union, and probably the European Union and the rest of the world. This is my assessment. Having said that, the European Union, of course, our DNA is anchored in multilateralism. We are fundamentally a multilateral organization. Maybe we are even more than a multilateral organization, because if you read the Schuman Declaration, you will see that the purpose was not the mere cooperation among some future member states. The purpose is a form of integration with a common legal space, with common values, with common principles, and with our treaties, which look more and more like a form of constitution, with the purpose to integrate, and we hope more and more to integrate in the future, even if there are divisions about this fundamental nature of the European Union. And that's why in those circumstances, I have no doubt that this concept, this vision, this idea of a more European Union that will be more sovereign in the future will be fundamental. Because more sovereignty, more will to be more master of our destiny will suppose three consequences for ourselves and for the rest of the world. The first one, more economic cooperation. That's much needed in these circumstances. It means that we have to improve our economic base, our technological base. We have to regulate much better than what we are doing today, because very often we regulate too much, too fast. We even regulate things that do not exist yet, but we regulate even if it does not exist yet, and it makes more difficult for our entrepreneurs, for these businesses to grow. Point one. Point two, military and defense. We have to develop our capabilities in that field, so that we have more influence at the geopolitical level. It will be challenging, but I'm certain some irreversible steps have been made, and it will be our path for the future. And my third point, and my last point at this stage, I think that we have to engage with the rest of the world, taking into account this difficult balance between our values, our fundamental principles, and on the other hand, our interests. And because I have this experience, I've engaged a lot with actors and players and leaders on all continents. I know that very often from the EU, we give the impression, maybe in good faith, but we give the impression that we lecture the rest of the world, that we know everything much better than the others. I think we could be a bit more impactful if we would be a bit more modest in the tone we use when we engage with the rest of the world. We have to be proud of our values, our principles, democratic principles, human dignity, that's fundamental, but also to find the way so that we have an impact and so that there are consequences, positive consequences. You see, these are a few comments, a few words. In those times, multiple worlds, it means we need more multilateralism, not less multilateralism. I feel that the EU has a special responsibility, and we can play, and I hope we will play a role if we become more sovereign and more in a position to build strong ties with other parts of the world.
Wow, there we go. We heard you. I think that we all agree that we are living a world of high multipolarity and low multilateralism when we need exactly the opposite. And basically, you mentioned the key role in this new geopolitical architecture, the key role of China and the US as key players as we reshape this multilateral order for different reasons. And of course, the European Union is a trusted partner, and it needs to do more, no? In how the world reorganizes and the power architecture reshapes. You mentioned, Jean-Michel, the number of conflicts around the world. I have the privilege to serve in the Board of Trustees of the Crisis Group. The latest account was 100 and something, 104 or 5 current armed conflicts. And we know that the very concept of security has changed from the conventional state-to-state warfare to the issues of that connect climate change and conflict, energy insecurity, migration, disinformation, cybersecurity challenges, and all of these really shape global stability. So how do you see the role of Europe, but for that matter, for the role for the UN to adapt to this new global security agenda and reflect these threats? And we have to remember that the core business of the UN was about saving and protecting humanity from the scourge of war. And but we are not able to deliver, especially because I see a very weak agenda on the prevention side. And we need to deliver more and better. So how do you see the role of Europe, but above all, the role of the UN in peacemaking and preventing conflict?
A few points. First, you mentioned China and the United States, and there is no doubt that the competition between China and the United States, it has a huge impact on the rest of the world, including within the European Union. And I think that it's very important for the EU to engage with China and to manage with China our differences in a responsible way. We have our differences with China. We do not have the same political systems. We do not have the same history. We do not have the same traditions. But we have to engage with China first to tackle the global challenges. We have mentioned some of them: climate change, security. We have to talk with China and to have this high-level dialogue with the Chinese authorities, I have no doubt. And I think we should try to avoid being instrumentalized for some national agendas of others. I don't like when there are attempts by the United States, for instance, to instrumentalize the European Union's position with regard to China. We have our own views, our own interests. We have our own vulnerabilities when it comes to China that we have to address. We have to diversify our supply chain with China. But we have to develop this normal conversation with China without being naive, taking into account those differences, but with the goal, the purpose to manage our differences in a responsible way, point one. Point two, I think that what we face within the EU is probably a shock for my political generation. Because, you know, in the last years, within the EU, very often we had difficult debates regarding the way we have to become, yes or not, more sovereign. And for some of my colleagues within the EU, this ambition to be more sovereign was seen as a way to take distance from the United States. I don't think it was the choice we wanted to make. It was just the awareness that we need to be more master of our destiny, because the choices we make will have an impact for our people all across the EU, and we don't want to be instrumentalized. And that's why when Russia decided to invade Ukraine a few hours following this full-scale invasion, we were all together, the 27 European heads of state and heads of government, and I think it was a turning point in the paradigm, which is the basis of the EU. Why? Because for decades, the basic idea was the following. When it comes to the economic development, the EU is in charge. That's the responsibility of the EU to promote this economic integration and to improve the economic basis of the member states. When that's about our security, that's about NATO. It means it's about the United States. That was the global approach within the EU. And I would like to be honest with you. I have the impression that within the EU, we were naive. And we were naive, why? Because some countries within the EU, the vast majority of those countries, the new European Union's member states, the Baltic states, Poland, some others, they were absolutely convinced that one day we could face a terrible situation with Russia. When some countries, like my country, Belgium, France, some others, they had the impression that the others, they were exaggerating a bit, and that we will be able to manage our difficulties with Russia. But on the other hand, in Poland, in the Baltic states, I'm very modest when I'm making this point. I have the impression that there was this impression that it was possible to trust the United States for their security, whatever will be the dangers and the risks we will face. Today, if we are honest, when we follow what we see in the Oval Office, when we see the humiliation of Mr. Zelensky, I think it's time to open eyes and to recognize that this double naivety is maybe the occasion to reconcile and to unite the European Union based on this idea that we have to work more to develop our capabilities, including in the field of defense, security, and to build a true industrial base in that field. Now, coming back to the United Nations system and the role in terms of peace and security, we have a good charter. We have a lack in terms of enforcement. That's a problem. The principles are okay. And the body, which is supposed to be the guardian of the UN Charter, is not delivering, because this body is not legitimate anymore. This body is a kind of, sorry for the word I'm using, walking death, not able to make decisions and to enforce and to make sure that the decisions are put in place, are implemented, and it's a pity, and that's regrettable. And I know that some could say, okay, we will again talk about a possible reform one day of the Security Council. That's very naive, that's impossible, it will never happen. I am not certain it will never happen, because in my opinion, what I'm observing, based on the European experience for sure, there's the fact that very often change starts slowly and happens suddenly, abruptly. And ideas that seem to be marginal, not realistic, one day, because of the circumstances, it becomes something very obvious, and it becomes a new normal. That's why we should not give up, and we should fight politically, we should struggle for the reform of the Security Council to make it more inclusive, to make it more representative, and to make sure that this body has the possibility not to be blocked anymore by those abuse of veto rights, point one. Point two, double standards. Double standards are a terrible poison. And even within the EU, we should look ourselves into the mirror. And we should ask ourselves, in sometimes we are not practicing double standards. I'm very sad, for instance, that we are not united within the EU when it comes to the Middle East. We are very much united when it comes to Ukraine and to Russia, and that's great, that's good, that's fundamental. We are united and we support Ukraine, and we want to continue to put in place sanctions against Russia, and we are legitimate to act that way, there is no doubt. But when I'm looking at what is going on in the Middle East, we condemn this terrible attack launched by Hamas against the people of Israel. We strongly support the right for Israel to exist and its security. There is no doubt that what we see today is not anymore related to the right of existence of Israel or to the right of security. What we can see today, these are probably war crimes. What we can see today, there's the use of famine as a tool of war, as a weapon of war, and it's not acceptable. And I think that the EU is losing a lot of credibility and authority because we are not united and not able to make clear and simple statements in that field. That's absolutely regrettable, in my opinion, and we are losing a lot in terms of authority and credibility when we have comments on some countries across the world, very, very assertive comments. And at the same time, we are not able just to say what is going on is not acceptable, and those annexations, that's not acceptable. And the fact that Mr. Mahmoud Abbas is not allowed to come to the United Nations General Assembly is not acceptable. That's regrettable, that's a pity, I'm sad, and in those circumstances, I'm not very, very proud to see what I see.
Well, thank you. I think these are very bold statements and very useful. And I would like just to pick up on your phrase that a profound structural reform of the UN is possible, and including the reform of the Security Council, that we should not say, no, it's impossible. It is possible because it requires political will, wisdom, and a full commitment to the UN as this universal platform. And I heard you say Walking Dead, and yes, but the UN continues to deliver, continues to work, but of course we all agree that it needs a profound and structural reform. And there is an ongoing process, and let's hope that it will just have a landing path into implementation and reality. And your warning about the European Union against double standards, credibility and legitimacy, I think is extremely important. I think our time is up, but let me just come back to you. If you were to give advice using your experience, because I think we're very good in the diagnosis and where we stand and what the problems were, but what to do looking at the future? Are there reasons for hope? What is that we can do collectively? Has the UN hope what is exactly that you would suggest that we do? What are the next steps before we close?
I would like to share an idea or even a proposal. I think that we probably underestimate how the regional organizations can play a very fundamental role in the future to support much more the multilateral system. If we are looking at the landscape, we can see all across the world, in Southeast Asia, ASEAN, the African Union, in Latin America, the Gulf countries, in Central Asia, there are more and more attempts to coordinate, to work together, and to develop some tools for more economic integration, for more investments, for more connectivity, for more interconnections. Of course, there are various levels in terms of political will, in terms of progress made in that field, but I have the impression that to make the multilateral system more operational and more effective, we should use more in the future the power of those organizations and the influence of those organizations. It doesn't mean that's easy, but I think that in the future, maybe even taking into account the possible reform of the Security Council, that those regional organizations could play a more prominent role. Of course, I am talking with my European experience in that field, and of course within the EU we have this level of political integration, of economic integration, but I have the impression that in many other parts of the world there is this understanding that at the regional level, because we share a territory, because we share very often some traditions, some cultural realities, and there is the need to cooperate more to prevent some conflicts, to solve those conflicts when that's needed. And I would suggest to use much more the possible added value of the regional organization, point one. And point two, there's something else I've not addressed today. That's the need to reform the financial architecture at the international level. And I commend all the efforts. World Bank, IMF, Antonio Guterres, and they are working a lot to try to reform. But what is the major obstacle? The major obstacle is the fact that many countries do not want to share power. And those who have the key don't want to make possible that the key is used for a more inclusive financial system at the international level. And it means that the situation is not fair, because the poorest countries, they do not have the access they need in terms of investment, and they have to fight two battles at the same time, climate change and the fight against poverty. And we need, I think, to support more them in their efforts to overcome those challenges.
Well, thank you, Charles Michel. I think he deserves a round of applause. This was very enlightening, and yes, indeed, key role of the regional organizations and reform of the international financial architecture. Let me immediately turn to our panel.